in recent public history. So we know that from the Hunter Biden laptop,
all right,
from the Russia. That's out there.
Well, let's get some other reaction, because you're sitting there looking hugely skeptical.
I am
you
very
look like
skeptical.
you're about to jump across the table at me.
An unapologetic American Trump supporter absolutely annihilated a panel of woke Brits on live TV, leaving their fragile narratives in shambles. This wasn't just some polite debate with awkward smiles and empty pleasantries. It was a verbal reckoning. She dismantled their flimsy arguments piece by piece, proving exactly what fearless and unbiased support looks like.
He was talking about CNN. He was talking about mainstream media, which is there to hold governments to account and to spread light onto issues that he is talking about.
That's an insane comment.
And let's be honest, this was a long time coming. Despite Trump's victory over Kamala Harris being a clear message, these media types have been scraping the bottom of the barrel, desperately hunting for anything to criticize. Well, after this public drubbing, they might want to reconsider before running their mouths again. So, it all kicked off on BBC's Politics Live, a room packed with one smugly woke host, two liberal cheerleaders, and one Republican lioness who clearly had no intention of playing nice. From the moment she opened her mouth, the tension in the room could have been cut with a knife.
But I kind of wonder whether, if you go out into the Midwest and sort of some of these more slightly backward parts of America, whether or not there's a
Excuse me?
Well,
That's where I'm from, so be careful.
With no disrespect meant.
It all started with a conservative MP casually taking a jab at backward Americans. Dismissive, inflammatory, and frankly, the kind of arrogance that screams, "I've never been to a diner outside London." But instead of brushing it off or taking the high road, the Republican turned that insult into an all-out verbal assault. And the best part? The Republican didn't just fight back, she dominated. While the UK panel clung desperately to their critiques of Trump and American populism, she systematically dismantled their arguments, reducing their lofty ideals to rubble. Trump's policies? She championed them with a fervor that had the room spinning.
Reaction here, Jennifer, from Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, and there's certainly been some toing and froing in terms of exchanges between Donald Trump and Sadiq Khan.
But why stop at the panel when you've got a prime target like Sadiq Khan? The Republican shifted gears with ease, setting her sights on London's ever-so-progressive mayor. Earlier that day, Khan had fired off a tweet about diversity, climate policies, and human rights. Your standard virtue-signaling buffet.
Is that his reaction to Donald Trump?
Yes.
That's insane. I don't know what he's trying to imply. And by the way, I think he missed a trick a few years ago when he didn't want Trump to come to London. He could have invited him, showed him, what a fabulous...
But instead of letting it slide, she called it out for exactly what it was. Divisive pandering wrapped in a shiny, feel-good package. According to her, London wasn't some progressive utopia. It was a hub for woke extremism. And the room? Dead silent. Even the host, clearly unprepared for this level of bluntness, struggled to regain control. And she didn't stop there. Instead, she dove right into Khan's history like she was flipping through a greatest hits album of hypocrisy.
That's an insane comment.
She brought up his vocal opposition to Trump, particularly his infamous ban on Trump visiting London that was less about principles and more about scoring woke points. The Republican pointed out the irony with surgical precision. Here was a mayor wagging his finger at Trump while presiding over a city drowning in rising crime and social unrest. Grandstanding over governance, she called it. And judging by the faces on the panel, the critique hit harder than anyone expected. And as we all know, Trump's rocky relationship with the mainstream media has always been a spectacle, but the whole enemy within label, that took things to an entirely new level of melodrama.
I have to say, he talks about healing the nation, and then in the next breath talks about the enemy within and attacking the enemy within. And when he's talking about the enemy within, he was talking about people like you, Joe. He was talking about CNN. He was talking...
And of course, CNN, Trump's personal punching bag, was front and center in this showdown. The Republican commentator didn't just defend Trump's stance on the media, they went in swinging, doubling down on the claim that outlets like CNN had ditched journalistic integrity ages ago in favor of pushing political agendas. And they didn't stop at vague accusations. They came with receipts. The infamous October 2020 Hunter Biden laptop fiasco? Oh, they went there. CNN had the gall to bury that story under the convenient excuse of misinformation, conveniently shielding the Democrats during an election year. The Republican labeled it for what it was: deliberate interference. No spin, no excuses, just pure, unfiltered calling out.
No, I didn't get that much sleep.
But CNN wasn't the only one getting roasted. The Republican laid into MSNBC and the New York Times too, painting a picture of a media ecosystem that seemed laser-focused on vilifying Trump while conveniently glossing over the flaws of his opponents. Take the January 6th Capitol riots, for example. The media coverage turned into an all-out character assassination of Trump, with breathless reporting about his supposed incitement of the chaos, but the Republican wasn't buying it. They argued that the coverage was engineered to frame Trump as some kind of democracy-destroying villain, conveniently ignoring the broader political unrest that had been brewing across the country for months. According to them, this wasn't just bias, it was a calculated move to rewrite history in real time. Naturally, this led to a discussion about Trump's brainchild, Truth Social, a platform the Republican praised as a much-needed antidote to the censorship-heavy world of big tech. Twitter and Facebook
goes out onto his Truth Social and, disparages them as well. So I think that it's an absolute farce.
They were the usual suspects, accused of shadow banning conservatives and outright kicking Trump off their platforms after the Capitol riots. Truth Social, launched in February 2022, was framed as the last bastion of free speech, a space where conservatives could finally speak their minds without fear of the algorithm gods striking them down. The Republican painted it as a David to big tech's Goliath, and whether or not you buy into the hype, you can't deny the audacity of the pitch. And just to keep things spicy, the Republican threw in a comparison to the British media landscape. While American outlets like CNN love their polarizing headlines, the BBC, they argued, wasn't exactly innocent either. The Republican took aim at the BBC's coverage of Brexit, where pro-Leave voters were often painted as either hopelessly ignorant or flat-out xenophobic. Sound familiar? It's the same sneering disdain Trump supporters in America have been dealing with for years. The message was clear. Media bias isn't just an American problem. It's a global epidemic that's shaping public perception in ways most people don't even realize.
Is that the Democrat voters have not been given a choice in any of this. Don't forget, 14 million people voted for President Biden in that quasi-primary that they had. Granted, it was canceled in a few states, and, a lot of laws were passed to discourage people like Bobby.
Then the conversation took a sharp turn toward Kamala Harris and her historic defeat, a moment the Republican called a reality check for the Democratic Party. Let's talk numbers. Harris couldn't even come close to matching Biden's voter turnout from 2020. Not a single county delivered her the same level of support. Let that sink in for a second. The Republican didn't mince words, calling Harris's campaign a hollow effort, leaning more on her identity as a black woman and her opposition to Trump than on any concrete policies that might have actually resonated with voters. But it wasn't just about the numbers. According to the Republican,
and look, it suits the Republicans if she is the nominee, because once this sugar rush of excitement, and actually not just excitement about Kamala, but rather relief that Joe Biden is no longer the president, because she is younger, she is more vivacious. Once that wears off, what people are going to start looking.
Harris's loss was symbolic of a much deeper rejection of woke progressivism. Americans, they argued, were sick and tired of campaigns that revolved around identity politics and empty platitudes. Harris positioned herself as the anti-Trump, painting him as a fascist, while offering little more than surface-level sound bites as her own vision. Voters weren't fooled. They wanted real solutions, and Harris's inability to deliver them was her undoing. The Republican didn't hold back either when it came to Harris's leadership, or lack thereof. They pointed to her infamous 2021 press conference in Guatemala, where she casually told migrants, "Do not come," a statement that managed to enrage both progressives and conservatives alike.
People got to see of her as the primary went on, the further down her numbers went. She ended up in single digits, as you say, had to drop out, not before she, of course, called President Biden racist for some bus incident, but that's fine because, we can forget what politicians.
On one hand, her own party saw it as a betrayal of their values. On the other, conservatives slammed her for the blatant hypocrisy, given the Democrats' supposedly pro-immigration stance. According to the Republican, this was just one example of Harris's knack for alienating literally everyone, a skill that ultimately cost her dearly. And the kicker? The Republican framed Harris's loss not just as a personal failure, but as a broader indictment of the Democratic Party's entire strategy. Rising inflation, the chaos of the Afghanistan withdrawal, and growing dissatisfaction with Biden's administration all played a part in sinking Harris's chances.
I understand why people are upset, but first of all, from a political point of view, I don't think those people were voting for Trump or J.D. Vance to begin with.
Yes.
So, and we know kind of in the midterms this past year, a lot of single women really were the ones that pushed a lot of the Democrat candidates.
But instead of addressing these issues head-on, the party leaned on Harris's identity to deflect criticism, turning her into a scapegoat for their own shortcomings. The Republican laid it out plainly. This wasn't just about one campaign, it was a wake-up call for the Democrats and their increasingly tone-deaf approach. In the end, the Republicans' critique was relentless, painting Harris's campaign as a masterclass in pandering and woke rhetoric that backfired spectacularly. They argued that her defeat wasn't just a political loss. It was a vindication for voters who were fed up with identity politics masquerading as leadership. And for the Republican, it was clear. Harris's downfall wasn't just an American story. It was proof that the tide is turning against woke ideology on both sides of the Atlantic.